The letter came from a probate attorney in Camden, South Carolina, the second week of February, and by the time Callie Ann Reese finished reading it twice at her kitchen table in Charlotte, she understood two things clearly. Her uncle Dutch had left her his failing hunting dog kennel outright, and her cousins were already calling each other about how fast it could be shut down. Dutch Reese had run Reese Kennels for 31 years on 11 acres outside Camden, breeding and training Boykin Spaniels, South Carolina's own hunting breed, bred originally for flushing turkey and retrieving waterfowl out of the state's swamps and river bottoms, small enough to fit in a John boat without tipping it. At its peak, Reese Kennels had placed dogs with hunters across 4 states. By the time Dutch died at 74, alone in the house he'd lived in his whole life, the operation had shrunk to 6 aging dogs, unpaid vet bills, and a county tax notice that had gone ignored for 2 years. "There's nothing here but liability," her cousin Brent said, standing in the gravel kennel yard 3 days after the funeral, looking at chain-link runs that needed rebuilding and a water line that had frozen and cracked over the winter. 6 old dogs, no income, and a county that's going to fine us if that runoff pond isn't fenced right. I say we call animal control, place what we can, and sell the land. Callie Ann had grown up an hour away and spent exactly enough childhood summers at Dutch's place to remember the smell of it, cedar shavings, wet dog, gun oil, without knowing a single practical thing about running a kennel. She was 31, worked as a veterinary technician at a small animal clinic in Charlotte, and had exactly 1 week of bereavement leave to decide whether Brent was right. She almost agreed with him. Then she met Dutch's oldest dog. Ruger was 11 years old, a liver and white Boykin with a graying muzzle and a torn left ear from some decades-old fence dispute nobody remembered the details of anymore. He was slow getting up, arthritic in both hips, and Brent had already put his name at the top of the list for the county shelter. But when Callie Ann walked the kennel row that first morning, Ruger was the only dog that came to the front of his run and sat, not barking, just watching her with an attentiveness that felt less like begging and more like evaluation, the way Dutch himself used to look at people he hadn't decided about yet. She found the filing cabinet in the little cinder block office behind the kennel 2 days later, mostly by accident, looking for a rabies certificate Brent needed for the shelter surrender paperwork. Inside, in hanging folders Dutch had clearly kept meticulously even as everything else about the operation slid, were pedigree certificates going back 4 generations, all of it registered with the Field Dog Stud Book. A real formal registry, she'd learn, one of the oldest purebred dog registries in the country, dating to 1874, recently folded into the Unified Certified Pedigrees. The kind with an official notation of field trial wins listed against a dog's name, not just a bloodline chart, but a record of what that bloodline had actually proven it could do. Ruger's folder was thicker than the rest. He'd placed in 6 regional field trials across 2 states in his working prime, and, more than that, once she started reading the notations carefully, he was line-bred back to a foundation sire from the 1970s that specialist breeders still referenced by name. A bloodline known specifically for steadiness on flushed birds rather than raw speed, the kind of trait that doesn't show up dramatic on paper, but that serious hunters spend years trying to breed back into a line once it's diluted out. She didn't understand what any of that meant until she called the only number she found taped inside the folder's cover, a man named Foster Calloway out of Sumter, who picked up on the second ring, and when she explained who she was and what she'd found, went quiet in a way that told her something before he said a word. "Dutch Reese passed," Foster said. "It wasn't a question. 2 weeks ago. And you've still got Ruger?" "For now. My cousin wants him surrendered to the shelter with the rest." "Don't," Foster said, flat and immediate. "Ma'am, I don't know you from Adam, but I've been trying to get a stud contract with your uncle on that dog for 3 years running. He kept saying not yet, wanted 1 more season out of him first. That bloodline's near gone from working lines now. Everybody bred for looks or speed the last 20 years and lost the steadiness out of it. There's maybe 4 or 5 serious Boykin men left in this state who'd want what's in that dog, and I promise you, not one of them cares that he's got a bad hip and a torn ear." Callie Ann sat with that for a long moment, looking through the office window at Ruger lying in a patch of weak February sun, unaware he was worth anything to anyone. The family meeting, the following weekend, was not friendly. Brent had brought numbers, the back taxes, the estimated cost of repairing the kennel runs to code, the county's letter about the runoff pond, which under South Carolina regulations needed either fencing or a permitted containment plan before it could legally hold kennel wastewater again, a fix that would run close to $4,000 they didn't have. Her Aunt Peggy, Dutch's sister, mostly wanted the whole thing over with, tired of watching her brother's decline play out in property disputes even after he was gone. "You're talking about keeping 6 dogs alive on a hobby," Brent said. "One of them's 11 years old. What exactly is the plan, Callie Ann? Because somebody offered to breed him isn't a business." "It's 1 litter," she said. "Foster's not the only one who called this week. I've had 3 men reach out since I posted in a Boykin forum asking about pedigree registration. All of them asking the same question, is Ruger still breeding sound? If he throws even 1 more litter off that bloodline before he's done, those pups are worth more individually than this whole property's back taxes combined." I checked. Working line Boykins with that kind of documented pedigree go for $800 to $1,200 a pup, sometimes more with wins behind them, and people wait a year on a list for it. And if he's not breeding sound, if this is you throwing money at a story you want to be true because you liked him as a kid? It was a fair question, and she didn't have a clean answer for it yet, only Foster's voice on the phone and a stack of yellowing pedigree certificates that meant nothing to Brent and everything to a very small, very specific group of people neither of them had known existed a month earlier. They compromised the only way families in that position usually do, on a deadline. Callie Ann had 90 days to either show real income potential from the kennel or agree to let Brent handle the sale and the shelter surrenders without a fight. The back taxes got paid from Dutch's small remaining bank balance, enough to buy time, but not enough to fix the runoff pond, which meant she had 90 days and a legal problem she couldn't afford to solve conventionally. She solved it in the end, the unglamorous way. A retired county extension agent, a woman named Willa Bynum, who'd known Dutch for 20 years and drove out once she heard through the grapevine what was happening, walked the property with her, and pointed out that a properly graded and planted vegetative buffer strip along the pond's edge, native rushes and switchgrass, not a fence at all, met the county's containment standard for a fraction of the cost of a permitted structure, as long as it was documented and inspected within the compliance window. It took Callie Ann and a rented sod cutter 1 exhausting weekend and Willa's signature on the inspection form to close that problem out for under $600 instead of $4,000. Ruger's vet checkup the following week was the part she'd been avoiding. Hip dysplasia showed clearly on the x-rays, worse in the left joint than the right, and the vet, not her own clinic, a reproductive specialist 2 counties over Foster had recommended, was cautious but not discouraging. Old, sound dogs with manageable dysplasia bred safely all the time, he told her, provided the process was done right. Progesterone timing instead of guesswork, a controlled environment, no unnecessary strain on the hips during the breeding itself. Foster brought his best working female down the 2nd week of March. It wasn't romantic. It was a folding table, a cooler of chilled semen extender in case they needed it as backup, 2 grown men and Callie Ann standing around a dog run with clipboards, and Ruger, slow and stiff but willing, doing what 11-year-old dogs with the right bloodline apparently still know how to do without being taught twice. The litter came in May. 7 pups, 5 of them showing the correct liver and white coloring and the compact build the bloodline was known for. Callie Ann had a waiting list before they were 3 weeks old. Foster took 2, a duck hunter out of Georgetown took 2 more sight unseen based on the pedigree alone, and the remaining 3 sold within a month of being weaned, at prices that, added together, covered the kennel's entire back debt and left enough over to rebuild 2 of the worst chain-link runs before winter. Brent came out to see the pups in June, mostly, Callie Ann suspected, out of a curiosity he wouldn't have admitted to on the phone. He stood at the run watching 7 Boykin pups tumble over each other in the grass, Ruger lying nearby in the shade, watching them the same steady way he'd watched Callie Ann that first morning. "I still think you got lucky," Brent said. "I did get lucky," Callie Ann said. "Dutch kept the paperwork for 30 years nobody else would have bothered keeping. That's not luck, that's just somebody caring about something longer than anyone around him understood why." She kept 4 dogs total past the 90 days. Ruger, retired now from breeding on the vet's advice, and 3 younger dogs worth keeping and training properly instead of scattering. The kennel doesn't run at Dutch's old scale, and it may never again. But the sign at the end of the gravel drive still reads Reese Kennels. The runoff pond holds a strip of native grass that turned out cheaper and better than a fence, and Ruger, gray around the muzzle, spends most afternoons the same way he always did, lying in a patch of sun, watching the gate, waiting to decide about whoever walks through it next.